have a section of notes now. That was your warm-up. You're going to hold on to that worksheet and use it as a study guide. Okay? You guys have your notes out? Mary, can you get your notes out, please? Gentlemen in the back, do you have your notes out? Yeah, get some notes. Take notes on. Dietrich, you got your notes ready? Yeah, that's fine. Do you have anything to take notes with the lecture, or you just eat barbecue somewhere? Stop, please. At this point, listen up and stop talking. Okay, I want you to know for the test that this is a short test. It's not a long test. Thus being not a short test, or a short test. But I'm going to ask you some very specific things on the test. And you're going to have to learn some things. I'll even tell you what you need to learn. It's important out of this class that you know what the Virginia watersheds are. And as part of our learning target, we're also going to talk about how to protect them a little bit later. But in order to protect something, you got to know what it is you're protecting. So here we have, you got to know what are the three main watersheds in Virginia. The three really big ones. What's the one we just talked about? The what? The Chesapeake Bay. Okay, there's two other watershed destinations, major watersheds. One goes to North Carolina, one goes to the Mississippi. That was actually, I didn't know that, so a couple of years ago I learned that one as I was preparing my studies here. You know, lived in Virginia for on and off for 5, 6, up to 10 years, and I never knew that some of the water in Virginia went to the Chesapeake, went to the Mississippi. That was quite interesting. Okay, water also goes straight to the Atlantic, but this is a really kind of small section. And there's a small part of southern Virginia that drains somewhere else called the Yadkin. I don't care about that one. You don't need to care about that one. You need to know these three. Water goes to the Chesapeake Bay. So here's the Chesapeake Bay Watershed. You can see how it stretches up through Delaware, way up here in the New York State, somewhere up here. Okay. Down here, if you're down near, I believe, Danville down here, way south of D.C., this water drains not to the Chesapeake, but rather to what we're going to call the North Carolina Sounds, or some bays and things down here in North Carolina. So 2 destinations so far, Chesapeake Bay, North Carolina. I've had students in the past not seeming to know that North Carolina is the state that's directly below Virginia. You guys now all know that North Carolina is the state directly below Virginia. Okay? Now, if you look over here, this is what I didn't know. And I've actually, this is the New River. I've been whitewater rafting on the New River twice. And I didn't realize that if I stayed on that river until, you stay on that river like you're going to do some huck fin rafting down the river, you will eventually go from the New River into another river, into another river, into the Ohio River, into the Mississippi River, and all the way down out to what city? What city will you eventually get to if you start following the New River?
What
city? What city is the port city of the Mississippi River?
New Orleans.
New Orleans. So if you get on the New River in a canoe, you could technically go all the way to New Orleans by canoe. Oh, it'd take a long time. You need some wicked rapids, maybe a couple waterfalls down the way. But this river will eventually go to New Orleans. From Virginia. I didn't know that. I thought that was cool. So you need to know the 3 major watersheds in Virginia. And I'm going to ask you, what are the 3 major watersheds? You're not going to have a word bank. It's not going to be multiple choice. You're just going to have to go, whoop, pull out of my brain. Chesapeake, North Carolina, Mississippi. Mississippi. Okay. Okay? Alright, what else do you need to know? Well, what we talked about earlier, you need to know the James River, the York River, the Rappahannock River, and the Potomac River are all Virginia's rivers. These are Virginia's main rivers that go to the Chesapeake Bay Watershed. Save the bay and all that. Okay? You've got to know what that these rivers are there, what they are. Okay? I might ask a question like, what are the 5 main rivers that feed into the Chesapeake Bay? And you're going to have to be able to answer, well, it's the James, the York, the Rappahannock, the Potomac, and the Susquehanna. Okay? I'm not going to give you a word bank. I'm going to ask you a question. You guys seen how my tests are? What are the rivers? List them for me. You have to be able to do that. You got to learn how to memorize. I recommend flashcards or concept maps. Something to help you memorize. You could, back in the day, in my day, I didn't have these fancy iPhones with voice recorders. We actually got out old tape recording sets, put cassette tapes in, hit record, I know, crazy. And we would record stuff over and listen to it over and over and over again to help memorize it. Okay? I could ask Mary if she knows the lyrics to whatever song, and she's going to say yes, and the reason is because she listens to it and sings it all the time. So, you could make a rap of this. Whatever you want to do. Whatever you want to do to memorize this, you need to know these things. Okay? And this little tidbit of information here is also quite helpful. Just saying. So, do you guys have this down?
Yeah.
As we come into some other areas of science, especially meteorology, I've got some raps for you. I've got one about radiation, conduction, and convection. I gotta stop thinking about it or else I'm singing it.
Let me get a Mickey.
Okay. You guys about ready for me to move on?
Yes, we can.
Nice, you ready?
So we're going to snap.
This is the Chesapeake Bay Watershed. Okay, the Chesapeake Bay Watershed. I want to show you how big the Susquehanna is as compared to everything else. Do you guys see this? Like over 50% of the water that goes into the bay comes from the Susquehanna. Okay, now here's that Patuxent here. You were asking about Dejan. You got the Potomac, Patuxent, the Choctaw, blah blah blah. The Mattapony. Is it the Pamunkey? The James, the Appomattox, Appomattox, that's hilarious. Appomattox. Okay, so here's all the different watersheds. I'm not asking you to know all the different river basins. I just want you to know the 5 big ones. Okay? So here's what you guys used, and here's what you see here. So all the way up here, you're way up into New York. Do you guys have any questions on what the Chesapeake is and where the water comes from? Okay. We're going to kind of change gears. We've been talking about watersheds. Okay. Shifting gears, gentlemen. Let's talk about estuaries. Estuaries. What the heck is an estuary? You don't know? You do know.
Brackish water.
What is brackish water?
Some dirty-ish.
Okay, I mean, you're thinking the right thing. Brackish water is not just pure water. What's going on to make the water brackish? This is an important vocab word if you don't know it. Trenton?
Isn't it like part salt water, part fresh water?
Yeah, it's partly salty, partly fresh. It's not 100% salty water, it's not ocean water 100%, and it's not 100% fresh water, river water. It's mixed. So here's a thought. Do you think that this mix is always the same mix? No. As you get closer to the Susquehanna River, is it going to be more or less brackish? Okay, let's look at it. As we get closer to the Susquehanna, here's the ocean down here. As we get closer to the Susquehanna, more or less brackish up here. Less. How about down here? More. You can have brackish water all the way down here at certain times. Why? Because there's a lot of water flowing into here, and fresh water tends to displace salty water. Why? It's less dense, and it pushes the salt water back. If you want to know more about that, take A's. Okay. Okay, one or more rivers, streams flowing into it, and tidal influences. Whoa! Tidal influences, what's that? You got it. Okay. Tidal influences. This isn't designed to be hard. Okay, I want you to understand though that with tides, what's coming in with high tide? What kind of water? Salty water. And what goes out with low tide? Salt water goes out, fresh water goes out. So you have this kind of bathtub. You guys ever sit in a bathtub and just kind of play with the water and you get the lapping water?
Yeah.
Tell me you've never played in a bathtub. Okay. That kind of the water not totally being completely drained, not totally being flushed out. So the ocean's trying to come in, and the fresh water from the rivers is trying to go out. And you have this kind of battle in between in this tidal influence, this tidal variation. So what happens with estuaries, this is an important point that I would write down. What happens in estuaries is you get stale water, stagnant water. It's very hard to flush out and clean out dirt and things in an estuary because the ocean's pushing the water back in as the rivers are pushing the water out. And that is why it's really a bad thing when we pollute the Chesapeake, because those pollutants get stuck in the Chesapeake. Okay? Now, what you need to be writing down is why pollutants get stuck in the Chesapeake. So why do pollutants get stuck in the Chesapeake? Who kind of got what I said? Can repeat it back to me. Dejan.
Because water from the ocean is being pushed into the estuaries while fresh water is trying to push back out, so it becomes stagnant and gets stuck.
Yeah. Did you guys get that? I saw the nod of the head from Genesis. Okay. Okay. Look here. Do I have a better picture? I don't think so. The ocean is pushing. The ocean is pushing in, right? Because you have an ocean, and the ocean likes to be dominant, likes to come in. So the ocean's coming in this way, trying to fill up this drowned river valley. It's trying to fill up the Chesapeake. And if there was no water coming in at all from the rivers, then you would have salt water. It would be a saltwater beach all the way up to here. The ocean wants to come all the way here and fill up the Chesapeake completely 100%. But that can't happen. Why can't it happen? Because you also have all this fresh water from all these rivers constantly filling up the Chesapeake from the other side. So 50%, look at this, all the water, any rain that you get in almost half of Pennsylvania goes to the Chesapeake Bay. It rains a lot in Pennsylvania. So all that rain is now traveling down the river this way. So what you get is this fresh water is filling up the bay from one side, and it's running into the salt water from the other side, and where it's mixing, it's brackish. Okay? And this area is, sometimes it's up here, sometimes it's further down here, and it kind of goes back and forth. But if you have a lot of pollutants, we're going to call it, here's my skull and crossbones. Okay, if you have a lot of poison and pollutants coming down the river, maybe from the factory, it gets stuck here because as it's trying to get flushed out, this different density water, the salt water, is pushing it back in. So this poison kind of goes down and then up and then down and then up, and it's kind of getting stuck in the Chesapeake. Does that make sense? So that's why it's really a bad thing when we poison the Chesapeake. So it's really important that we save the bay. Quite literally. I mean, it's sometimes we use tongue in cheek and kind of laugh at it because we'll save the bay. But it actually really is rather important. Okay. You guys have any questions about that? Ooh, here's a good point. What is the #1 pollutant that goes into the Chesapeake? Okay, so you think oil. That's a good thought. Where would the oil come from? Well, okay, oil could be spilled from boats. Where else could oil come from? Cars? Maybe cars spill. Where? Maybe spilled gasoline. Maybe a leaky gasoline tank. Okay. That sounds like a really nasty pollutant. What other pollutants are out there? Fertilizer. What's fertilizer? It's what?
It's like chemicals to help your lawn grow.
Okay, chemicals to help your lawn grow. So here we have some chemicals that are designed to give plants food. Okay, that's great if I'm trying to grow a tree, or if I'm trying to grow corn, or tobacco, or whatever Virginia likes to grow, right? Virginia used to be a big tobacco state. Maybe up in Pennsylvania. Who's known for living old school lives in Pennsylvania? They don't have buttons, they don't have cars. The Amish. What's one of the #1 professions of the Amish? They're farmers. So there's lots of farms up here. Okay. Well, if everybody's fertilizing a field, okay, so you have a farmer's field, big, flat, maybe hilly field, and I'm spraying fertilizer on it, and then it rains. What do we want that fertilizer to do? We want it to go into the ground. Does it all go into the ground? No. So if it doesn't go into the ground, it gets into the what? It starts with the W.
Water.
The water, and the water is in what we call a water shed, right? So, Abad, stop it. Okay, so here we have tons of fertilizers in all of this area from a lot of farms. Okay, we get fertilizer from farms. Where else do we get fertilizer? Story. Where else do we put fertilizer? Do we only put it on farms? Have you guys heard of the company True Lawn Chem Green? Okay, and all these other companies will make your lawn green. Okay, how about golf courses?
Oh, yeah.
Right? There's lots of places where we're liberally putting these fertilizers down in the ground, and anytime it rains, they get washed into the watershed, especially synthetic fertilizers, because synthetic fertilizers don't all absorb the best way. And those get into the watershed. Now, I'm not going to really get big into this, but fertilizer is the worst one. So, write in your notes, fertilizer is the worst pollutant. So you guys got that on the second try, that was good. Fertilizer. If you don't know how to spell it, I will spell it for you. Fertilizer. Okay, well, if fertilizer makes things grow, why is that a pollutant? Isn't that a good thing to make things grow?
They kill animals.
Not like animals, and not fish.
Dejan, can you tell us why fertilizer's bad? You can, I know Jessica can.
Doesn't react differently with the oxygen and the water?
Has something to do with that. Jessica, do you know the answer?
I mean, fertilizer is just pesticides, right?
Fertilizer and pesticides are different. A pesticide is a poison we put on something to keep the bugs away. Fertilizer is usually nitrogen ion chemicals, nitrates, that go into the ground to help the plants grow. Well, what happens is, have you guys ever looked at a lake that doesn't move, like a stagnant pond in the middle of the summer? What's growing on the pond? Algae and green stuff. So this algae and green stuff sucks up all the oxygen out of the water, kills the fish. Now you have what we call anoxic water. So the biggest problem, one of the biggest problems we have in the Chesapeake is all the fertilizers that go in there. So that's one of the biggest. There's tons of other problems. Okay, so you guys got the biggest one. Did you write it down in your notes? Might be a good thing to know. Right? Hint, hint, cough, cough. Okay. So, estuary. Let's talk about different types of estuaries. The big one that you need, I'm not gonna lie, this is what you need to know. You need to know this fact. But I want to actually show you the other ones as well. This is called a drowned river valley, the Chesapeake Bay. Or if you can see here, okay, here's here's a watershed. Here's the same watershed. But down here, the ocean's not around, or the lake is not around, or whatever's not around. You have all these nice little rivers flowing together. This is what happens when the ocean gets pushed inland, maybe all the ice caps melted and sea level rose. So if sea level rises, this is what would happen. The ocean rises and it floods the valley. So the Chesapeake Bay is a drowned or flooded river valley. Okay? That's very helpful to know. Just life fact, that's a great thing to know. It's a drowned river valley. I mean, if you look at the shape of the Chesapeake, don't you see how it looks like just one big river that's going down to the ocean? If sea level drops 15, 20, 30 feet, a lot more of the Chesapeake would actually turn into a river, and the Chesapeake might actually move down here, and then the bay would only be right here. If sea level rises, then all of these little valleys are going to look a lot more like the Chesapeake Bay as it is right now. It's going to flood these valleys. Okay, that's a drowned river valley. That's a type of estuary. There's a couple other types. There's the bar-built type. This is where you get lagoons. Has anyone heard of a city in Italy called Venice?
Yeah.
Venice is sitting in a lagoon, where you have the city of Venice is here, and then you have, we'll call this the land, right? And Venice is floating, right? It's a city built into the water. Well, they have a lagoon that goes something like this. It's a natural lagoon. So the ocean is out here, a lagoon is here. Well, what is a lagoon? Well, ocean water is stopped from entering the lagoon by natural, usually it's sandbars, barrier reefs, maybe a coral reef, something along those lines. And then you have this nice, still, peaceful water here, and then the city was built here. So this water doesn't mix with this water very well, and you have this estuary type thing where it's a different type of water, blah, blah, blah. Why is Venice sinking? Because they cut a hole in the lagoon so ships can get to Venice. And now the lagoon is being washed out and the city is sinking. So that would be a bar-built estuary. Okay. A fjord, always fun to say. So unless you're talking about a horse, a Norwegian fjord, then regular Norwegian fjords are the same thing as a drowned river valley, except it's not a river valley, it's a drowned glacial valley. Remember how I said that, what's the shape of a river valley? What alphabet letter shape does it make? What? An S? Is that the shape of a river valley? No. It makes a V. Right? So here's our river. Makes a V-shaped river valley. So this would be the Chesapeake Bay. This is a drowned river valley. Well, what shape does a glacier make? V rivers, glaciers are what? A U. This is a glacial valley. Glacial valley with rivers and all that. A fjord, F-J-O-R-D, a fjord is not a flooded river valley, but a flooded glacial valley. So you have these nice rounded, like tubular shaped valleys. Yeah. I really want you to know the drowned one. Okay, but these aren't bad to know. If you look up in California, you have these tectonic where the ground shifts, and that causes water to be trapped. These are different types of estuaries. Okay. Oh, top 10. Okay, you have another worksheet in front of you.